Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel for another video in my history series, where today I'm filming a video requested by one of you guys, and it's something that I don't think I ever would have come across if not for this request, so thank you. This is the kind of story I love to share, small moments in history that make a big difference, just people being amazing. Today we're going to talk about the Dunnes Stores strike, how one worker in Dublin, Ireland refused to handle the sale of products from South Africa in protest of apartheid policies, and how it snowballed from there. Of course, this video is sponsored by Magellan TV, who I have a long-standing sponsorship with. They're a streaming service dedicated purely to documentaries, and each month you all know I like to make a couple of recommendations of documentaries that you should watch, and they've got so much brilliant brand new content being released every single week. This month I have two fantastic documentaries to recommend to you, starting with a documentary that was incredibly helpful in my research for today's video. That's Coming of Age, the ANC's 100 Years of Struggle. This is about the journey of the African National Congress, the South African political party, and the journey it's gone on to fight apartheid since then. It's defined the last century of South Africa's history. Honestly, I'm not huge on politics and political parties. That's not really where my interest in history lies. So if it weren't for this video being about apartheid, I probably wouldn't have clicked on this documentary, but I'm really glad I did. The second documentary, however, was one I was immediately drawn to, and that's Tailored Humanity: A Revolution in Genetics. I find biology so interesting, especially genetics. And this documentary is all about the possibility of being able to edit DNA and the ethical and moral questions that come along with that. You could wipe out diseases and genetic disorders, edit humanity and animal life for the better. But this is something that can easily be taken too far. How dangerous is it when it becomes possible to create a made-to-order embryo? What human traits would be edited out? Will unedited humans be considered less than edited ones? Magellan TV have everything from true crime, science, history, nature, and everything in between, with new programmes added weekly that can be watched anywhere on your TV, laptops and mobiles. It's compatible with Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Google Play and iOS, and loads of the programmes are available in 4K. If you enjoy my channel, then honestly I cannot stress enough how much you will enjoy Magellan TV. And I'm happy to announce my viewers can now take advantage of an exclusive offer. That's 30% off of an annual membership. An entire year of a catalogue of over 3,000 documentaries for less than $3.50 a month. Simply click on the link in the description to claim your discounted annual membership today, and yes, that does include those of you who are already signed up. Just let your subscription lapse and then you can claim this offer for yourself. I feel like it's important to start this video with a brief-ish synopsis of what apartheid was, because otherwise you're going to have no clue what this video is about. I don't actually have a full video on apartheid yet. It's another one of those video ideas that's been on my list for a really long time, but it's slightly intimidating. It's a huge topic to cover. I will do it one day, but here is a synopsis. Apartheid was, at its very simplest, a system in place in South Africa that separated people based on their race and skin colour, enforced by the South African National Party governments from 1948 to 1994. The people in power were, of course, white, and despite the majority of South Africa's population being black, their rights were constantly diminished. Black people, as well as eventually Asian and other people of colour, were forced to live in certain areas away from the white population. They weren't allowed to travel or vote in the white areas without the correct papers. Black and white couples were not allowed to get married nor have any kind of sexual relationships. By 1958, the government had removed black citizens from their homes and relocated them into regulated areas called homelands. Land Acts set aside more than 80% of the country's land for the white minority, and all-around contact between the black and white population was restricted as much as possible. But as is always the case with any kind of injustice, soon groups were formed with the goal of fighting against apartheid, the most prominent of which was the African National Congress, the ANC, one of the leaders of which was Nelson Mandela. Whilst at first the ANC's protests were peaceful, it soon became clear that that wasn't the way to get heard. White police had no qualms about arresting and attacking the black protesters, even killing them. So the ANC started to take military action against the government. When Nelson Mandela was eventually arrested, his fight became a symbol of resistance, a symbol for everyone else to continue this fight. It was also his arrest that really brought attention to the rest of the world as to what was going on in South Africa. In 1973, the United Nations General Assembly denounced apartheid. By 1976, the UN Security Council voted to impose embargo against the sale of firearms to South Africa. People from all over the world joined the anti-apartheid movement and protested the imprisonment of Nelson Mandela. Everywhere, people were crying out for things to end. By 1985, both the US and the UK had economic sanctions against South Africa, reducing the amount of trade that South Africa could receive. Which I suppose brings us nicely full circle back to what this video is about. How a small number of striking Irish workers helped to fight apartheid. It was the 18th of July 1984, or the 19th, depending on which source you want to believe, when a 21-year-old woman called Mary Manning took a stand and made a difference. She was a shop worker at a DUNNES store, an Irish store that, from what I can gather, is primarily a supermarket alongside clothing and household departments. The first store was founded in Cork in 1944 by a man called Ben Dunn, who vowed that he was going to revolutionise the Irish market in the aftermath of World War II, offering pre-war prices when no one else was. His new store would be a success, and over the coming months more would be established all across the country. Over the next couple of decades, more and more would open up, and it's still a very popular store in Ireland today from what I can gather. Wikipedia states there are currently 139 stores across the country. There were a few stores in Britain as well, but they all closed down by spring of 2018. Back in 1984, Mary Manning was working on the tills in the DUNNES store on Henry Street in Dublin. Her union, IDATU, had given workers a directive not to handle any South African goods in protest against apartheid. So when a customer came up to her attempting to buy 2 outspan grapefruits from South Africa, she refused to register the sale, even refusing to handle the grapefruits. The customer accepted the situation, and according to an article on the Irish Examiner, she didn't kick up a fuss. But a manager who I assume overheard this interaction did. This wasn't the first time that this had happened in the stores, with workers refusing to handle South African goods, and a final warning had already been issued to staff: sell the goods or you lose your job. So Mary was called up to the office and was promptly suspended after she refused to back down. She said that she was given 5 minutes to reconsider her actions and was told that nobody else would support her and that she would never get another job in Ireland. She refused. Also suspended was Karen Gearan, her union shop steward and the one who had given the colleagues the union instruction not to handle any South African goods. As Mary and Karen walk out the store, 9 other IDATU union members joined them in solidarity. What would follow would be a strike that lasted 2 years and 9 months. IDATU stands for, and bear with me here because I filmed this bit about 1 million times and I can't say it, Irish Distributive and Administrative Trade Union. And this was a slightly different union from a lot of other ones in Ireland at the time. The leader, John Mitchell, was a lot more left-leaning than your standard and took the unpopular stances of fighting for the inclusion of sexual orientation in employment equality legislation, a whole decade before homosexuality was even legalised in Ireland, and he was also a prominent supporter of travellers' rights. IDATU was a pretty progressive union and of course supported the Dunnes Stores workers' right to strike wholeheartedly, although this support would wane a bit over the coming 33 months. Whilst the strike lasted, the workers would only get £21 a week strike pay from the union and didn't receive much support from anyone. Mary later told the Journal that in the beginning, the first few days, we thought we would just be out for a few days and that would be it. But then we started to learn what was going on in South Africa and it became something much more than a union policy. It became something that we all totally believed in, and there was no way any of us could go back and handle South African goods. Karen Giron would say that before the strike, all of the workers had very little concern about what was actually going on in the world around them, but the strike changed them all. Once they made a stand, they couldn't really go back. It wasn't right. Other unions didn't strike in support of them, with the Irish Congress of Trade Unions and the Federated Union of Employers saying that the IDATU was way offside on the issue. They got a lot of knockbacks, and people who they thought would support the cause, members of the Irish anti-apartheid movement like the church and the government, tried desperately to distance themselves. Actually, for a long time, the government refused to make any comment on the strike, and the general narrative was that the strikers were young and inexperienced, that they didn't really know what they were on about. Which is frustrating in itself. Why does someone's age automatically make them unable to understand what they were doing? These were all fully grown adults. In August and September of 1984, there were 2 rounds of negotiations between IDATU and DUNNES. According to historyworkshop.org.uk, the second round of negotiations actually happened very spontaneously when Ben Dunn, the Dunnes Stores owner, turned up at the union's head office and demanded to meet with the people in charge. Ben Dunn is notoriously a very private man. He didn't really do interviews back then. He didn't really make himself known. So I can imagine for him to do this, he was probably at his wit's end. This well-publicised strike and picketing outside the store must have reflected incredibly badly on his business. But all attempts at negotiations reached a stalemate. The strikers, who would regularly picket outside the store, received abuse from both members of the public and fellow co-workers. Members of the public would spit on them, and according to The Independent, colleagues would throw tomatoes, nuns would cross the picket line in an attempt to entice them, and even the Gardaí would harass them. I can imagine it was hard for them at times to keep going, but they had a boost of morale when exiled South African freedom fighter Nimrod Sejake joined them on the picket line. Mary would later be quoted as saying that Nimrod was the first black person she'd ever actually met in Ireland, and his knowledge and experience of the situation in South Africa galvanised their efforts. Another striker, Theresa Mooney, would say, "Nearly every day, Nimrod came to offer us encouragement and explain the nature of the apartheid system of governance. He explained why our stance against handling the South African produce was so special, unique, and important." Nimrod Sejake had been a teacher before becoming a labour organiser of South Africa's working classes, becoming a founding member of the South African Congress of Trade Unions, and was a very active member of the African National Congress. In a 1955 raid of the homes of activists and anti-apartheid supporters, Nimrod was arrested, even sharing a cell with Nelson Mandela. As a result, he was forced to leave South Africa, sentenced to a 30-year exile. After spending periods of time in various countries, Zambia, China, Albania, Egypt, he eventually got given asylum in Ireland. He wrote just months before the strike, "From my organising work, I can see the enormous power of the working class. today it is more clear than ever that the working class can change society. He predicted the power that somebody like Mary Manning could have, and she would later say that they kept going because of Nimrod and what he shared with them. Eventually, word of what was going on got to none other than South African Bishop Desmond Tutu, who in 1984 had been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his stance against apartheid. On his journey to the award ceremony in Oslo, he had a stopover in London and asked for some of the DUNNES strikers to come and meet him. Mary Manning and Karen Gearan flew over to meet him alongside a union official, and at this point they were only 6 months into the strike. Tutu called for a groundswell of support for the strikers, and the meeting gave them some much needed publicity for their cause, with all the international press wanting to interview them. The next year, Tutu invited them to South Africa, but upon arrival at Jan Smuts Airport, they were immediately held captive by armed guards for 12 hours before being put on a plane back to Ireland. As they were boarding, it said that Karen Gearan put her fist in the air and shouted, "We will be back when South Africa is free." In the following years, they would travel to other countries speaking arrangements, sharing what they'd learned, what they knew, and they marched through Dublin with thousands of supporters. In September 1985, the Minister for Labour, Rory Quinn, issued a statement saying that the major supermarket chains in Ireland had agreed to seek alternatives to South African produce, and so the union met with the strikers to discuss whether this was enough to begin negotiations on their return to work. However, later that day, DUNNES stores denied that they would be phasing out South African goods, so the strike continued. The strike lasted all the way until 1987, when the Irish government finally banned the importation and sale of South African goods. This was the first such ban of any Western government, and did come by as a direct result of the strikers' work. The public pressure became too much. It was beginning to look very bad for the government to continue ignoring what was going on. It was embarrassing for them. So they made the ban, and the workers had won. And not only did this affect Ireland, seeing a Western government make the move enticed other governments around the world to consider the same. Mary and some of her colleagues did make the decision to return to work at DUNNES after the ban was implemented, but many of them found that the atmosphere was very oppressive. I mean, obviously management weren't too happy with the whole situation. After finding herself blacklisted from a lot of jobs in Ireland, she later emigrated to Australia in 1988 before returning back to Dublin 5 years later. Mary says that she doesn't have a single regret and would do the same again if she needed to. She's proud of what she did. Karen Gearan also went back to work at DUNNES, only to find herself fired by the company not too long after for apparent poor performance and absenteeism. Unwilling to accept this, saying that she was a very good worker, Karen took the issue to tribunal. She argued that she had been treated unfairly and was required to work the till for longer periods than her colleagues, leading to her being medically treated for stress. She won the tribunal, although she didn't go back to work at DUNNES after this. Safe to say that Karen was a woman who wouldn't back down in the face of adversity. In 1990, the workers finally got to meet Nelson Mandela, who would say that hearing of their fight whilst he was stuck in prison was one of the things that helped him keep going. He'd only been free for a number of months when he came to visit Dublin and made a point of meeting the workers. It was a huge honour for all involved. He said that the strikers demonstrated to black South Africans that ordinary people far away from the crucible of apartheid cared for our freedom. In 2008, a plaque that had been presented by the South African president was unveiled in Dublin. The very next day, Ben Dunn just happened to be on RTE Radio 1's Liveline discussing something else entirely, when a live caller brought up the strike. He said on the spot that he would apologise to Mary Manning for his business's treatment of her given the opportunity. So later in the show, he would get the opportunity after she joined on a call. Mary would say if he was genuine about his apology, let him donate the money that I lost for 2.5 years to charity. I don't know if he did. A street was even named after Mary in Johannesburg eventually, and the strikers were invited to attend Mandela's funeral in 2013. They took the opportunity at this time to go and visit Nimrod Sejake's family whilst they were there. He had since died, but it was a huge honour to meet his family and share their stories. I just love stories like this, small moments in history that have made a huge difference, things that they just don't teach you about in school. It just goes to show how every single one of us, no matter how small or insignificant we feel, we can go on to make a difference. I think it's so important to never forget that. These strikers, Mary Manning, Karen Gearan, Liz Deasy, Michelle Gavin, Bonnie Monroe, Alma Russell, Tony Davis, Sandra Griffin, Teresa Mooney, Catherine O'Reilly and Brendan Barron did this of their own accord. They made a difference in a time before where they even had social media and the world at their fingertips. Imagine what people can do now with social media, with that communication. Of course, these Irish workers alone didn't bring an end to apartheid, that would be crazy, but it would eventually come to an end in the early 1990s. The worldwide support, the pressure put on the South African government made all the difference here. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you know of any other stories like this, just small moments in history that make a huge difference, then please let me know. These are the kinds of things that I just love learning about. These are the reason that I love history so much. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.